The puppet, or Marionette, is one of the most popular and important characters in Five Nights at Freddy's, and has been my favorite since the beginning, only partially dethroned by the daycare attendant. They're sitting together up there. And I'm not alone in this. Due to its connection to the lore, its story, its amazing design, very unique, right on the line between creepy and cute, a lot of people love the puppet. And for years, we're all under the agreement that, all things considered, it was one of the good guys. Even if it was an antagonist, it was technically on the side of good. It was just complicated. But recently, the reception to the puppet has shifted, and while I would like to say that it's largely because of its appearance in the Fnaf 2 movie, it was actually happening before it came out. Theorizing about characters who don't get enough screen time and few voice lines happens. And when it happened in this case, it led to a line of questioning about whether the puppet protector was in reality a failure and a fraud. You may think I'm exaggerating, but no. There's been a lot of discourse surrounding the puppet recently, about how it didn't do enough to stop Afton, about how it wasn't a hero, about how it actually selfishly caused the other children killed by him to suffer by putting them into animatronic bodies. Reframing the character from being one of the heroes of the series to being just a marionette martyr who pretended to be something more. But is that the case? Well, no. As a matter of fact, while I usually get fully behind questioning a character's morality, such as in questioning Henry's the voice of reason for his overlooked flaws, I think that this line of thought overlooks some key things. Some of the only things we know about the character and the situation of Fnaf's story to pin the blame on them, when there's already a list of other characters higher up on the list. In a way, I feel that this is a lot more like defending Gregory than the Mimic. I made a defense video on both. While I defended the Mimic for how it was handled versus what it really was, my defense of Gregory was basically that he had a lot of stuff pinned on him that really was either the fault of Vanessa, justifiable self-defense, or taken with maliciousness when it was more complicated than that. And I think that same argument applies to the puppet. So, what I'm going to do is give you a brief backstory for the puppet, and then I'm going to go through every talking point I've seen about how it failed and come up with what I think are reasonable defenses. And while I am biased towards the puppet, I want you to know that all of my arguments are coming from as much of an unbiased place as I can give them. I brought some evidence with me. So, let's get started. First, a brief backstory. Back in likely 1983, heavily hinted but not entirely nailed down, a girl named Charlie Emily was murdered behind a restaurant that was likely Fredbear's Family Diner. Apparently some some entertainment set came out after that and said it was Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but we haven't actually seen that in the games. And I'm a little, mixed on trusting the books for everything. Which is ironic because I am going to be using the books later on to further some of my points, but I digress. She was killed by William Afton and was the daughter of Henry, William's former friend and business partner. But she was wearing a security bracelet at the time, connected with a security-based animatronic puppet. The puppet was lured out of the restaurant and found her, collapsing with her, and became possessed by her. Sometime later, 5 children were murdered at Freddy's, and the haunted puppet, still hanging around, put their souls and possibly their bodies into these classic animatronics: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy. This is shown in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame. Later on, the puppet is seen at the toy animatronic location in one of the minigames, luring the old classic Freddy across the pizzeria. There are children's bodies scattered in blood, and the puppet tells him to save them, spelling it out. But they fail to, either with the minigame ending abruptly, or the Purple Man, stand-in for William Afton the murderer assumedly, and the simple message, "You can't," coming up. This shows that the puppet was actively trying to stop him from killing more children and wanted to guide the other animatronics to save them, but these endeavors largely failed. The puppet was stationed in the prize counter of the toy restaurant and still was an active animatronic at the time. But the toy restaurant closed, and Freddy's reopened and closed again. At that location, that next Freddy's location, William Afton returned and smashed up the classic animatronics. This resulted in their souls being released from their bodies, haunting William Afton and leading him to hiding in his suit, setting it off, and then getting murdered by and trapped in it. In the good ending, there is a Happiest Day minigame where we see the 5 souls move on. One extra soul, wearing a puppet mask, appears and brings a cake which stops the 5th soul from crying, leading to them all being released, including the puppet. Though we know the puppet itself did not move on, so it's possible this ending is not canon, or that the puppet itself remained. It should also be noted that unlike the phantom animatronics in that game, we see a fully rendered normal puppet in the Fazbear Frights building as well. It isn't a mistake, it's a normal, regular puppet model. Meaning that, like all of the other stuff dredged up from Freddy's, the puppet was there too. Then for a period of time, we don't know what happened to the puppet. But we do know it was found by Henry, Charlie's father, who trapped it into an animatronic bear called Lefty, which may have been shocking it. There is some debate, but steady voltage to soothe and sedate, I don't know. I know tasing subdues animatronics, but I don't recall it ever being soothing. Anyway, it's put up on stage, and then at night, sent to roam the vents below with the monsters Afton created, including himself, until the end of the week when the place goes up in flames. Notably, the puppet, Lefty, is not shown burning in the fire, but it never came back, so it assumedly did. Years later, the puppet's mask was spotted on the back of the blob, so it was basically over. In Ultimate Custom Night, we get our first voice lines from the puppet and a glimpse into their, at that point, mostly unknown personality, during which they say a few things of note. Firstly, they say they are more aware than the other animatronics, that they are like animals. The others are like animals, but I am very aware. They call themselves the protector of the others. The others are under my protection. They say, I don't hate you, but you need to stay out of my way, which kind of makes no sense in that context if they're talking to Afton in Purgatory. Stay out of my way of what? It only really makes sense if it was Michael. And something that will become very important later, I recognize you, but I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. There's also a story spoken by Candy Cadet in Pizzeria Simulator that is likely about the puppet, since at the time there weren't any other female characters, and that was the same game when Save Him became Save Her. In this story, a woman is locked in a room and can take one of 5 keys that she can use to save one of 5 trapped kids. She tries to melt the keys together to save all of the kids, but this fails, and instead they are all doomed, herself included. Again, that may or may not be about the puppet, but all the context surrounding it suggests that it is. This, along with the voice lines and its previous appearances and what we know about the puppet, suggests that it was in fact something benevolent. It wanted to save the other souls like itself and was trying to protect them, but its own ambition in doing so was constantly thwarted, and it couldn't really save anyone. It also was pretty clearly going after Afton, whether it was summoning the classics to stop him or just showing up in Fazbear's Fright right around the same time Springtrap was dug up from the rotten walls of Freddy's. It is aggressive to those who get in its way, like, let's say, the workers at Freddy's. But by its own statement, it would only target those who were either bothering it or stopping it. There's also one more thing, but I'll save that for dramatic effect. Okay, so now you know who we're dealing with. But before I get into the proper defense though, let me dismantle one point of contention. So this pushback against the puppet, like I said, has been around since before Fnaf 2, the movie, but it has definitely amped up since then, and that is because Fnaf 2 depicted the puppet, and Charlotte, as an angry, vengeful spirit that is manipulative, murderous, and willing to kill even kids in a vendetta against parents, not actually Afton himself, but all parents. And some folks have taken this as being the true version of the puppet. But allow me to untangle this web of lies, because while we don't know too much about the puppet's personality, everything we do know goes up against this interpretation. Let's line them up. 1. The puppet in the games attempts to save the other killed kids and brought the animatronics to life, then made itself their protector. Film Puppet didn't do any of that. In fact, it uses and controls other animatronics but doesn't care about them. 2. The puppet in the game seems to be going solely after Afton, unless night guards get in its way, as I'll discuss later. The film puppet doesn't care about Afton. She's just going after all parents and even children. And people she considers her friends once they run out of use for her. 3. The puppet in the games is depicted as calculating but is never depicted as evil. In the film, the puppet is manipulative, has sadistic tendencies, withdrawing out certain deaths, and will turn against people she even seems to bond with, like Abby, a kid. 4. In the games, the puppet was a security bot made to watch kids, possibly specifically to watch Charlie, or just whichever kid had a certain colored band. In the film, the puppet was just a character who Charlie was fixated on and constantly drawn to. 5. In the games, the puppet's goal is to stop Afton first and foremost and save others. In the films, the puppet's goal is to escape her confines and take revenge. Lining these up together, yeah, they're not the same character. In fact, this happens to line up extremely well with another character who the puppet is also entangled with. If you're listening and not seeing, I just pulled up another line showing that circus baby Elizabeth Afton matches every single character and plot beat as film Charlie. It's actually kind of funny. But that aside, the movie and games aren't one-to-one anyways. Here's a quick list off. Mike and Michael are heavily suggested in game to be the same character, in the films they're not. Even if they're not in game, we hear Michael's thoughts in the logbook, and it was never suggested that he was drinking this much Kool-Aid. Vanessa exists in a completely different time period, replaces Elizabeth Afton, acts like Book Charlie as a cop instead of a security guard, and is romantically involved with Mike, who would likely be Michael in the games, who she would have been directly related to. Let's put it this way. In the games, books, and movies, William Afton is spring-locked in the same way. But the events of how this happens, who causes the spring locking, where exactly it happens, and what happens to him afterwards are all different. So bottom line, who's to say the puppet is one-to-one? And with that, let's return to the games and begin the proper defense of the puppet. I will go through every point of contention and slowly peel them apart. Starting with, they cause the animatronics to be possessed, causing the children suffering. And I should add that while this is technically correct, usually the wording adds either an amount of selfishness or self-righteousness. Not just that the puppet caused this to happen, but that there was an amount of neglect or lack of care for the other kids. And the truth is that that's just not the case. First off, we know from the minigames in Fnaf 2 that the puppet wasn't strictly making the kids possess animatronics to help it fight Afton. We see words like, give gifts, give life, and save them. It goes out of its way to deem itself their protector. This isn't just ego, it genuinely seems to believe that what it was doing was trying to save them, was giving them a second chance, or more likely an escape from death. And then it didn't just abandon them, but watched over them. That doesn't mean that it was entirely successful, but we see its frame of mind. And this is backed up in the key story. Likely this story depicts the puppet's greatest mistake, trying to save everyone, but instead causing them all, including itself, to be trapped in a prison of Afton's making. It couldn't bear to choose one, so it tried to save them all, and it didn't work. And we know outside of that story, in real life, or the real life of the in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's, the situation wasn't that simple. There was no indication that the children were trapped in rooms and could have been freed, and unless it is about the puppet leading out one of the animatronics away from Afton, it doesn't seem to be a direct correlation, like most of Candy Cadet's stories. So the most important part is the moral, or punchline, depending on how you see it. The woman had a guaranteed chance to save one. She tried to save everyone, but all it did was take her one opportunity away. That's basically what happened to the puppet. It tried to save everyone, but it resulted in them all, including itself, being trapped. And this was a mistake. But it's not something that frames the puppet as a monster or a bad person. It's hard to morally say that a mistake like this damages someone's character. It was a bad decision, but plenty of people would have tried the same thing. And another thing is that people act like the puppet should have known that trapping the animatronics would have prolonged their suffering, would have been terrible, a horrible existence, that it should have known that death was the better option. No? How would it know that? Ignoring that this is a murdered kid, how is anyone supposed to know that? How is this puppet supposed to know that they would be possessing these animatronics for years? How is this puppet supposed to know that death, this scary unknown thing, is the right option? And that's assuming that death is this blissful slumber and not a purgatory void as shown in Ultimate Custom Night, or being permanently trapped at a red lake as shown in Ultimate Custom Night in Fnaf World, or in a fake game world constantly corrupted by memories of their own deaths, such as Fnaf World. This kid was supposed to see these dead kids, and instead of saying, "Oh no, I have to save them and bring them back to life like me," they were supposed to think, well, they're probably better off dead. And remember, this happened before the toy location and from the newspapers, before the place closed and the classics were withered. That means that the puppet became haunted and was still working in the business. It had no frame of reference for what might happen if that business shut down and Fazbear Entertainment started raiding them for parts. How can we say that the puppet did this out of selfishness? We can't. And you can say it doesn't matter if it meant it out of selfishness, it happened. And I disagree, because we're discussing the puppet's character, and there's a huge difference between I tried to save someone and I failed, and I purposefully forced someone into a horrible existence knowing that they were going to suffer. So, I think that covers it. Moving to the next point. Why didn't the puppet stop Afton? Now, I get the logic here. Because of the puppet's position, we assume that it is something stronger than the others, that it is the true puppet master and that it has more power than them. But I think it's easy to forget that Afton dispatched 4 classics on his own, in FNAF 3. And that Afton was familiar with the concept of tasing animatronics, controlled shocks. Afton wasn't just a hapless night guard, he was a professional. There is a reason that nobody caught him until he got too cocky. There's no doubt in my mind that the reason the puppet, Golden Freddy, and everything and anything else didn't catch Afton was because they couldn't. And I don't think there's much argument to that. Just because the puppet jump scares us doesn't mean it could have got the jump on Afton. Heck, how does the puppet actually kill? Well, they tried to show this in the movie and it came down to 2 options. Possessing and releasing someone causing death, something it doesn't do in the games, and anacondaing around someone until they're assumedly strangled. But look at this thing, it's not exactly sturdy. A fully grown man probably could wriggle their way loose. Not a normal man, but again, Afton the slippery weasel. And there is another aspect to this that I think could also come into play. The puppet is shown leading Freddy to save the kids, and likely to stop Afton. It does this because it cannot stop him, but Afton overpowers them. Now, in the trilogy and movies, which are both different continuities, yes, but have some reoccurring themes, they both establish the idea that William Afton was able to trick the classic animatronics, that they believed he was one of them when he was wearing his suit, that they weren't aware enough to recognize him or what was truly happening. The puppet was able to see through Spring Bonnie, but they weren't. And while we don't know if this is the same in the games, it is one of those consistencies that made it in between the books and movies, along with William Afton being the killer and him becoming Springtrap. But the most important fact in the puppet's defense is the line it said earlier, "I'm not afraid of you, not anymore." The puppet was afraid of Afton, but of course, he was the murderer. He murdered Charlie and then other children and got away with it. It makes sense that she would be scared of him, that the puppet would be wary of someone who we know had extensive power in the company. Why didn't the puppet attack Afton? It being afraid of him when it's possessed by a kid is a very valid answer, especially in a series where the adults always and consistently fail their kids. So here we have a full list of reasons why not. Fear, a lack of power, of ability, Afton's unwavering plot armor. The issue at hand is that we have seen the puppet as this larger-than-life, more powerful animatronic. I too believe this, but just because its powers are different doesn't exactly mean that it had the capability of stopping him. After all, if it could've, it would've. It wanted to save them. It couldn't. So on to the next point. I am aware. A lot of people have taken this as the puppet saying it knows everything, that it knows the night guards aren't William Afton, that it knows what he's doing, but the truth is that's not really the case. Like I said, in the books and movies, in scenes regarding Afton, specifically written by Scott himself, it is consistently shown that the classic animatronics are convinced by William Afton that he is one of them, that he is friendly, and they are somewhat unaware of their circumstances. The puppet, however, knows what's going on. It knows that William Afton is dangerous, but that doesn't mean that it knows everything. And if I may compare this with another character who knew a whole lot, we've got Circus Baby, and she used it to manipulate others in her favor. She was smart. She knew how to put on a soft voice and lead someone into her plans. And she did succeed. But not only was she unable to differentiate Michael and William, from Michael's words, but apparently despite having a vendetta against William and knowing what he did, she rolled over and became entirely charmed by him by Pizzeria Simulator. She went from knowing exactly what he thought of her, exactly what he did from her, to suddenly ignoring all of that. The point I'm getting to is that I am aware doesn't necessarily mean the puppet is aware of everything. In fact, the puppet's other quote says it recognizes him, so apparently it didn't always do so? We'll get back to that, but it's aware, it's not omnipotent. It's always watching, but it is stuck at the prize counter. But this awareness almost always comes with another bone to pick. The puppet killed night guards. In that, the puppet was aware, so it should have known that these were harmless people and that they were unrelated to the killer. Now, normally I would just chalk this up to a mix of self-defense and ghostly anger. But there's something that I don't see people adding to the equation. Okay. We know William Afton was working at Freddy's. And from the Purple Men minigames in Fnaf 2, we know he likely worked as a night guard, undercover as one. If we go by the Silver Eyes, originally titled something like Fnaf The Untold Story, we know William took on an identity as a night guard. We know Michael Afton did this as well. We know that Mike smelled during Fnaf 1, possibly because of Sister Location's events. We know that Fritz Smith, of Fnaf 2, also smelled and was also able to tamper with animatronics like a technician, which Mike was claimed to be in Sister Location and which Mike did in Fnaf 1. We know as of Pizzeria Simulator that for some reason the night guards had the names of the deceased children, almost like they were fake names. Mike was confirmed to have used, well, fake-ish names. What's the chances that most of these night guards were Mike? The only standout being Jeremy, who just happens to have the same name as a dead kid. And yes, names are reused, but Pizzeria Simulator went out of its way to change names given in the book, despite using book characters to name them after the night guards. So it seemed to have been a purposeful detail. So there is a chance that most of these guards were Mike or Will. But here's the most important part. What do we know about Mike? Well, the one thing we know about Mike...
They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
Is that he looks like William. He looks enough like William that Circus Baby, the sly and cunning thinking bot planning to escape, believes that he is him. And if Circus Baby believes that he is him, then how easy would it have been for the puppet to believe it is him? The puppet says it's aware, but they must look very similar. So, first defense, most of the night guards probably look like William. The puppet was never fully confirmed to have facial recognition, but the toys do. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't confuse the two. But even that aside, we can't entirely fault the puppet for lashing out at the people who work at Freddy's anyway. We know they actively cover up crimes, and it would be so easy to bunch a bunch of them together into a group of bad guys. Fully grown adults do it constantly, and usually they're not being actively threatened by them. And that's not even getting into the fact that it is heavily implied, the treatment of Mangle being stated in Sister Location, that the sister company does it, the Pizzaplex's poor ethics and abandonment, that Fazbear Entertainment actively neglects and in some cases abuses the animatronics. You're the puppet. You're stuck in a box 24/7, occasionally hearing the staff talking about how much you creep them out. You wake up to find Toy Foxy is a pile of trash laying in Kids Cove. The old animatronics, your haunted friends, are now withered in the back being stripped of parts, and the day staff is currently mopping up the blood of someone getting hurt and trying to cover it up before anyone notices. Yeah, going after the staff suddenly makes a little more sense. I could keep going on, but the bottom line is that I don't necessarily think we should read too much into the puppet attacking night guards when A, all of the animatronics do it, say once we get to security breach, and B, it's basically a gameplay mechanic. Next up, it didn't do anything, and that is that over the years, it didn't do anything. Now, there's two veins of thought to argue this point. One, it was trying to do something, it just couldn't get it done, and two, literally every FNAF character except William doesn't do anything. Henry, Sits around for years doing absolutely nothing until after all this time and all these bodies and deaths and the puppet being handed off from business to business, finally decides to do something. Some people think he might have gone to jail. It wasn't confirmed. Actually, it wouldn't actually make much sense for Henry to have gone to jail because the person who went to jail was working at one of the Freddy's locations, but Phone Guy didn't know the original owner. So that could just be a plot hole, but still. Mike kind of just sits around and lets stuff happen to him, and then apparently disappears for a significant portion of time. Vanessa gets possessed, gets saved, and then kind of just doesn't do anything with the broken Glamrox and the Mimic situation, and nothing to stop or save Cassie that we know of. The funny part is that if we're going off the book trilogy, the only character who seems to be actively doing stuff and seeking things out is Charlie. Everyone else is especially complacent most of the time, until like the third book. So to say the puppet, who we see doing stuff, they're just not succeeding much in their endeavors, did nothing is factually wrong. They were stuck in the center of it. They tried to stop William, couldn't, tried to save the others, double-edged sword, went to Fazbear's Fright to maybe try and stop William, literal backfire, and then sometime afterwards was trapped in Lefty, which took away their autonomy for good. Meanwhile, characters like Henry, who are clearly shown to be cunning enough to have done something, didn't make any viable attempts to capture the puppet beforehand, and when he did, went with the most heavy-handed approach possible, and then still stuck it on stage and into the vents with its murderer nearby. The puppet got a real bum deal that came from everyone around it failing it. The kids who locked Charlie outside, the dad who was AWOL, the staff who were actively covering up crimes, even the other possessed suits who were complete victims but may have been totally bamboozled by William Afton. And all this time, the puppet was a kid trapped in a robot. The puppet is misunderstood, but this isn't a misunderstanding that just started recently, and it's beyond just the puppet kinda sucks takes that I've been seeing. And I was in on it too. Not the puppet kinda sucks takes, but the other misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding is this. We all attributed more to the puppet than it had. More power, more ability, that it was the leader, that it was different. It was something greater than the others. But when you get down to it, the puppet was just another haunted animatronic. A guide first and foremost, a protector when it could be. It tried to save lives and it tried to stop Afton, and while it had other animatronics alongside it, they were just not enough to fight back. Whether it be from its own fear or Afton's vice-like grip on Freddy's, they simply couldn't break those strings. But that doesn't change what it is. It is a protector. It did try to save them. It did think it was doing the right thing. It is still a complicated good guy gray area blend. It's just not as all-powerful as the design and spontaneous go-everywhere ability made it seem. Charlie was the exact opposite of her father. While she tried for years, struggling in the midst of it, fighting back, and couldn't get a foothold, Henry stood by for all that time and then stepped in once everyone was good and broken and managed to succeed. Not succeed in every endeavor, but at least stop most of Afton's influence. Charlie wasn't selfish, she wasn't manipulative, she wasn't using the others, she wasn't lying to them, she wasn't lying to us. She was the Marionette, and she was in the same prison they were. Y'all just mean. Thank you for watching.